With the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. So, in the present context, studying the Treasury of Precious Qualities of Jigme Lingpa, we are presently then in the 9th chapter, which is the precepts for the Bodhisattva path. So this implies that us having taken the Bodhisattva vow, we also then engage in the, you could say, discipline or the practice and the basically the integration of that. Now, within that, the practice of the Bodhisattva vow, we really distinguish between two significant aspects of the Bodhisattva vow. One is the aspect of our intention. And that's basically what you could say, what makes us tick. It's what really is behind our, you could say, fundamental attitude with regards to life. And that's what we call the bodhicitta of aspiration. It's this wish that we can benefit others, that we can, on a temporary level, benefit others, whatever it might be, helping them with their laundry, taking out the garbage, driving them to school, looking after them, keeping them company, giving them a phone call, whatever it might be. And ultimately then also leading them to enlightenment. So that's the intention that you could say is at the foundation of the practice of the Bodhisattva vow. And the next, which we'll be coming to shortly, is then the application. So that's then actually doing something. So we've looked at the various aspects of these precepts of bodhicitta of aspiration. And in there we start off with what we don't want to do. And these have, you could say, they're very sort of in general in terms of attitude, but also very practical. And now we're looking at what we do want to do. And there we have then 4 trainings that are basic to this. And the first of these is the practice of simply giving happiness and taking suffering. And that we could take on a very sort of, you could say, a general level, universal level, simply that we give happiness, we take suffering. That's what we do. We take out the garbage. We hand over the goodies and we take the garbage. But we also have a very concrete practice that accompanies that. And this is the practice of Tonglen, which is actually a practice of integrating this attitude with one's breath. Simply thinking that one is exhaling everything good to others, inhaling everything negative. And again, this is where we need to be very clear on what is behind that. Because it's not that all of a sudden we are sort of thinking, hey, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to take on others' negativity. That could very well happen, And that's where we need to be clear that this bodhicitta of aspiration goes very deep. It's right down there, like with parents and their children, where in general, you could say when we're around people in an ordinary social context, we're sort of happy to give our happiness, some of it, and then we're also willing to take on a little bit of suffering, but not too much, And that's where we have some standards that apply on a very ordinary level. But there's also that sentiment as it exists in conditions of unreserved love, like that of parents, possibly also that we might have with a significant other or towards our own children or parents or, very close persons in a conventional way. But that's where the Bodhisattva path And here we're not just talking about, you know, sort of a nice little thing that we do on the side, but the Bodhisattva path really is this vast vision of wishing to establish all sentient beings in enlightenment. And that's where we're not going halfway there. As long as there still is some sense of self and other in which there's this limitation, then there will never be enlightenment. Enlightenment is the falling away of these cognitive and emotional obscurations that are associated with preserving myself a little bit and looking after the others maybe. It's the falling away of that entirely. And training in that vastness is then the yoga of bodhicitta, which is then generating a truly courageous, a truly great mind. So that's where we probably very honestly can say, well, this is really difficult for me. I don't know if I can do that. And that's for sure. It's like, you know, me in astrophysics, you know, I definitely couldn't read a book on astrophysics or, you know, something else, but it's a matter of training. And that's where we are training in this, not focusing on what we can't do. And this is, by the way, something that's very common among Buddhists. It's more that we sort of think, oh, I'm not doing it as good as I should be, or I've heard this is how the bodhisattvas are, and I'm nowhere near that. That's obvious, but the thing is, we are heading in the right direction. So we should really look at the half full glass, that we're actually thinking in terms of a culture and a practice that is profoundly beautiful, and really what everybody wants anyway. Everybody wants, you could say, to be selfless or appreciate selflessness in others. So there's nothing you could say extraordinary or undoable in this, but it is something that we obviously are training in. So that's where we then have this attitude at the basis. So in addition to that, then we have this training. The second one was training in generating bodhicitta on the basis of 7 recollections, particularly then the recollection of our connection with all beings. And that's, of course, again, where we look into a much greater scale than when we ordinarily think. We think in terms of countless lifetimes. And that's where we operate with a recognition of what others have given to us, our wish to pay them back, and so forth. So these we gradually, this is ways in which we can gradually develop the qualities of warmth towards others. And then we have then what's called the 4 negative actions, or 4 black actions, and then the 4 white. So we've looked at the 4 black factors, and then presently we are on the 4 white factors. So we'll look at stanza 19, in which Jigme Lingpa, let's see here, he writes, so, to this the 4 white forces are the best of remedies, never at the cost of life or limb, intending to deceive, always to respect and praise the bodhisattvas, as though they were the very Buddha, to care for every living being without guile or underhandedness, and then lead all on the pathways of enlightenment. So, not lying, not deceiving, respecting and praising the bodhisattvas as well as the Buddhas, not being, how do you say, underhanded, deceitful, and to aspire to bring all beings to enlightenment. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes then, the best antidotes to the 4 black factors are the 4 black factors are the 4 white factors. These are never to lie or intentionally deceive anyone, even at the cost of one's life. To respect and praise all bodhisattvas as if they were Buddhas, with utter sincerity, to strive in thought and deed for the benefit of beings. To inculcate an attitude of aspiration, bodhicitta, in those one is able to influence, and to lead them wholeheartedly on the stages of the path to perfect enlightenment. So these should be fairly obvious. To never to lie intentionally or deceive anyone. that should really be about deception at a very basic level. Of course, it's sometimes necessary to lie. And it could very well be the famous example that we always have is that there's somebody being chased by some evil people, and they run past us heading towards our right. And then somebody comes and says, "Where is that person?" And then we say, "Oh, yeah, they went." And then we point to the left. And that's, of course, lying. But that's really out of benefit or the wish to benefit. So that's where also we need to always take into account that values of an action lies in the intention. Because in philosophy, we have, what is it? Immanuel Kant, who would say we have these categorical imperatives. We should act in particular way. We should never lie. And that's where we would end up with this sort of absurd situation where we might actually assist those that intend to do harm and so forth. But other than that, and what we talked about in terms of the 4 black factors was actually deceiving one's teachers. We could see here to mislead or deceive those who are worthy objects of homage, teachers, spiritual masters, and so on. So it's more in that regard that we don't want to be lying. And to respect and praise all bodhisattvas if they were Buddhas is that the bodhisattvas are the ones that actually reflect and you could say manifest or live our potential, our Buddha nature. And as such, then we see teachers, we see those that are guiding us on the path, we see them as expressions of this enlightened capacity. And that's where we would see them as we would practice. Of course, we can't see them as Buddhas because we're not Buddhas ourselves, but we can nevertheless, we can work on appreciating and reflect on their qualities and sort of cultivate that attitude. And then, of course, to do whatever we can to benefit others, however we can, not holding back. And particularly in terms of then, on the general level, we wish to benefit them, but then specifically, if we can benefit them in terms of guiding them on the path, we do so. So these were the 4 white factors. So we've completed then the 3 first of the 4 conditions that guide us in the bodhicitta of aspiration, the giving and taking, the 7 steps towards developing bodhicitta, and then the 4 white and the 4 black and the 4 white factors. And then we have then the 4th precept, which are then the 4 attitudes that strengthen bodhicitta. So here Jigme Lingpa writes, 4 perceptions fortify and guide the enlightened attitude. To look upon one's teacher as the Buddha and take his teaching as the path, to take as friends all those who practice them, and to look upon all beings as one's very children. These are the perfect precepts linked with aspiration bodhicitta. So that's where, in a way, this is very simple because this is what's basic to taking refuge, seeing the Buddha as the teacher, the Dharma as the path, the Sangha as companion. And then in addition to that, to see all beings as if they were, you could say, our responsibility. So here, Kangyur Rinpoche, he says, there are 4 attitudes of mind that strengthen bodhicitta and protect it from decline. They are set out in the Samadhi-Raj Sutra as follows. 1, to consider as a real Buddha, the master of the Mahayana, from whom one is receiving the unmistaken teachings on the path. So that's where we hopefully have somebody who's guiding us. I think most of us here probably would have some connection to, say, Tsongsa Khyentse Rinpoche, and also Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche, and other great masters, His Holiness Sakachunsen, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and so forth. And that's where we don't just see them as sort of interesting phenomena or, you know, nice people, but really see them as Buddhas, as what essentially has brought us, or rather what is that in our lives are you could say, the representation of enlightenment. And then to consider as the path the profound and vast teachings. Now, when we come across these terms, profound and vast teachings, this actually is synonymous with the Mahayana, and it refers to all the teachings that we have in the Mahayana, such of course as the Buddha's teachings and so on, and also very much the vast commentarial tradition, which also of course involves the practice, but that come down in the Mahayana lineages. The profound teachings referring to the teachings on emptiness, the second turning of the wheel, the teachings on shunyata, particularly then as was taught by Nagarjuna. And then the vast teachings, the teachings on all the qualities of awakening, Buddha nature, the lineage that comes down from Maitreya and Asanga. So that is where then, when we are looking at understanding the path, and particularly I would say us in the modern world, this is we need to do that. We're surrounded by so much information, so much, that fills up our hard disk, and we have a strange proclivity for wanting information. We're always sort of, I just heard that, or I heard this, or looking up new information, and we're always accumulating information. It's really quite particular for our culture. If you ever happen to come across other cultures, it's not necessarily this sort of like cultural tendency towards gathering information. The other day, Jigme Rinpoche, on the occasion of Jamang Khyentse Wangpo's anniversary, he was talking about this phenomena that we just love to, we're so inclined to gather information. And with that also, we're inclined to think critically. And that's where we can't really just pretend, oh, I'm so in love with the Dharma, I just want to practice the Dharma, and without actually critically really looking at what is it. So it might be very appealing, but that's the thing about what's appealing one day sort of loses the novelty the next day. And that's where it's really important to actually know what are we doing and the reasons for it, and to actually engage with the Dharma on the basis of a solid understanding of what it is. And that's why we need to hear the Dharma, we need to critically think about it, see how it applies to us, and then engage with it. So that's then where we can say we then have an actual path. And then to consider as one's friends, as one's friends, all other bodhisattvas who are practicing the Mahayana path and whose view and actions are in harmony with one's own. Now we have, of course, what we call the Sublime Sangha, which are the great beings on the path, the Arhats and the Bodhisattvas. When you take refuge, you have collection and visualize in front, then depending on what form of refuge you're taking, but in many cases, people visualize and aggregate an assembly of Arhats, an assembly of Bodhisattvas that represent the noble Sangha. But of course, also, we would say, and particularly within the context of the Bodhisattva lineage that comes down from Nagarjuna, we would actually say that anybody who aspires to enlightenment and who takes the Bodhisattva vow, they are actually Bodhisattvas. So you might know a few people around you who have taken the Bodhisattva vow, and that would in many cases include everyone here, possibly. But I mean, it's just something that is very common within the Tibetan tradition, that we take the Bodhisattva vow. And there's nothing not to like about it, but also it is really big. And that's where we should respect the others who have taken this vow as worthy of respect. And one should really strive in keeping harmony with them. They might be a motley crew, but nevertheless, they are doing the right thing. And then finally, to approach the infinite multitude of living beings as though each one were one's own child. And that's again where we look at the scope of the Bodhisattva practice, and it's radical in terms of the degree to which we're actually engaging with others, not just in being nice to them, but really completely dedicating ourselves to their well-being. Now, of course, this doesn't work out so that we can all of a sudden be everywhere and everything for everybody. But at the same time, it actually is something that if we just have that at the core, then we aspire to, however we can, just somehow being of benefit to others. And this, of course, is something that we then work on, cultivate. It's not something that we just sort of leave and sort of say, okay, enough. It's something that never ends. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, all these trainings, beginning with the practice of Tonglen, giving and taking, and concluding with these four attitudes, constitute the authentic precepts of aspiration bodhicitta, as distilled from the teachings of the Mahayana texts. So the Mahayana texts are vast in terms of all the teachings we have in the sutras, as well as all the teachings that we have that are, you could say, related to that, the skillful means of the Vinaya, the wisdom teachings in the Abhidharma, and also all the Shastras, and all the Upadeshas or pith instructions that we have. So there's an enormous amount of texts, if you like, and in the Indo-Tibetan tradition, there's very much a respect for this body of knowledge. It's very clear that knowledge, intellectual knowledge itself, is not the what ultimately will change individuals or generate the qualities that are required for the bodhisattva. Not ultimately, but it does inform. And that's where there's been an incredible respect around the text and the study of the text down through the Buddhist history, particularly then in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. So that's where, while there is such an enormous amount of texts, in this case, what we have actually in the context of the Treasury of Precious Qualities is really a distillation. So if we just have this also, that's good enough. Nothing is missing in a text like the Treasury of Precious Qualities. So we've now covered the precepts of the Bodhisattva of aspiration, and now the precepts of bodhicitta in action. Now, to distinguish between these two, we have this famous quote from Shantideva, where he would say, the bodhicitta of aspiration is the intention to go somewhere. The bodhicitta of action or application is actually going, the actual going. So one thing is that I have the intention to go to a particular location. The other is me actually going there. So that's where there's you know, where we then walk the talk, so to speak. We actually do it. They come together. So we are already, you know, it's not like we wait for one or the other. We already, while there is the bodhicitta of aspiration that we're working on, we also practice the way that this attitude is applied. And as we'll see here, this then constitutes what we call the paramitas, particularly the 6 paramitas, 6 or 10 paramitas. So active bodhicitta's precepts are the 6 transcendent virtues. The first 5 bring about the gathering of sublime merit. The final one produces a great gathering of wisdom. Without relying on these 2 accumulations, there's no Buddhahood. Skillful means and strength, then aspiration and primordial wisdom. One speaks of 10 perfections when these 4 are added. So the 6 paramitas, they consist of 5 that belong to what we can call accumulation of merit. And then the 6th one, prajna, is wisdom. And then we also have additionally 4 more that are more, as Kangyur Rinpoche describes, or Gyamtso describes, more sort of qualities that emerge from these 6. Okay, hey, there's a question here. Thank you. I'm always so grateful when people ask questions. That gives me the impression that somebody's listening. No, I know you're all listening. Benefit of others. Is there any attitude of this doing in a way of when we are asked for it, when we want it, but we are not asked? How is this connected with our self-confidence? This has a lot to do with our self-confidence. But mind you, confidence in this case is not really associated with the ordinary self-confidence that has more to do with us actually feeling, I am good, but is more actually confidence in the unconditional goodness that's basic to us. It's not based on, you could say, credentials. But that's where the benefit of others from such a place of wisdom and fundamental attitude of wishing to be there for others, when that attitude is there, then the action comes, you could say, more or less organically. Yes, it will be when we're asked for it, but then again, also sometimes we'll just know that something is required. So that's even when we're not asked. But I think the bottom line here really is not so much to think, what should I be doing, but more, where is the love? You know, it's not so much in terms of the behavior, particularly now, as we've just looked at the bodhicitta of aspiration. It's more actually of being aware, or rather cultivating, more than anything, cultivating this attitude of wishing to benefit others. We shouldn't be thinking, what should I do or not do? And that's where, once there is this deep caring, then the rest comes you could say organically, spontaneously. So that's where the bodhicitta that we're cultivating is very much connected with a condition that's, yes, it's selfless, and it's, you could say, imbued with goodness and caring, but above all, it's connected with an unconditional quality of simply the basis of our being. So that's where this is something that emerges in the context of practicing the path. Yeah, okay. So, so Kangyur Rinpoche then says, the precepts to be observed by those who have taken the vow of bodhicitta in action comprise the 6 paramitas, or transcendent perfections. So this is it. If you think, what's the bodhicitta in action all about? 6 paramitas, but let's look at these. And here we have the commentary from Yenteng Gyatso, I hope. Yeah. He says, no, this is actually not from Yenteng Gyatso. I think this is just from the translators. Yeah. But anyway, it says here, according to Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi Shastra, there are 4 root downfalls to be avoided. Sorry, this is just me being a little bit, be patient here. Okay. That's a little bit odd. I think I don't know. Well, I'll read this, but it just looks odd in this context. Anyway, it says here, in Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi Shastra, there are 4 root downfalls to be avoided. 1, out of desire for reputation and honor, to praise oneself and belittle others, to refrain from giving, whether materially or spiritually, through a sense of miserliness, to harm others out of anger, and if for ignorantly to criticize the Mahayana not being the Buddha's word, and to concoct one's own teaching, proclaiming it to be authentic doctrine. In addition, there are 46 minor infractions of the precepts of bodhicitta in action. These are explained in the Samvaravimshaka of Chandragomin. See Dunjum Rinpoche, Perfect Conduct. Okay, all right. So I guess when it talks about the precepts, then we should avoid these 4, and then comprise the 6 paramitas. Now here, the next one here, I think more talks about the these things describe the actual paramitas themselves. Let's just be clear on what the paramitas are. And of course, this will be covered here. But paramitas are essentially, you could say, skillful means. They are the skillful means that take our, and particularly the first five, they take our, you could say, dualistic phenomena. You could say basically the way that we are now in an unrealized condition. They take these as the path. And that's what we mean with skillful means, that we actually can, skillful means is using what we have on the path. And that's where then these comprise generosity, discipline, patience, energy, and meditation. But then the sixth, and that's what makes it real, the real paramita, is the wisdom that sees through the dualistic confusion that drives samsara. And that's where then this is what we call prajna, or wisdom. And it really is that quality that cuts through the deception. So deception is something where we're simply just confused. We're not particularly bad, but we're just confused. And again, I'm afraid I'm going to have to use the example of the rope that's mistaken for being a snake. Prajna is when we see, when we see in the dark, we see what we think is a snake. We're not bad people. We're not seeing properly. And then somebody nudges us, or what is it? Somebody switches on the light or whatever, and we see there was no snake, there's just rope. That's prajna. And that's not about something mysteriously happening, but it's just seeing clearly. So that degree of insight that sees through the deceptions, or the deception of samsara, particularly then the fixation on phenomena in a mistaken way. That's where it's not about, this is also the beauty of the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha is not telling us what to think, not telling us what to think or whatever, or do. The Buddha is simply telling us, please look, please look. And that's what also in the case of the snake that we think is there, we're not freed from the snake by sort of praying that then somebody will take the snake away, or we talk with the snake, please let's be friends. Or we sit down next to the snake and then we just say, well, there's a snake there, but I'm going to meditate and I'm just going to keep a calm mind, And that's where we would say just having that sort of, you could say calm or shamatha doesn't work unless there's the vipassana, there's the prajna, because that's where we actually see, hey, there was no snake to begin with. And that's prajna. And so the others, they have to do with working with our, you could say, stuckness and our dualistic experience of me and the others and all of that, my situation. That's basic to us. We are presently very much involved in this dualistic mentality. So that we have to humbly acknowledge. But that's where the practice of the bodhicitta in action is then to practice these 6 paramitas. So that's where then here, and this is Yonten Gyatso then that says, the transcendent perfection of generosity and the rest are defined by 4 special qualities, xie shi. 1, they eliminate their contraries. So that means in the case of, for example, generosity, it eliminates miserliness. 2, they are associated with the wisdom transcending the 3 spheres of notions of subject, object, and action. When we practice the practice of generosity, it's giving, for example. Let's say we give. But there's various ways of giving. And you can give sort of, I give somebody something, here, I give you this. Then afterwards, I think, gosh, I'm a nice guy. I gave this, to that other person. And that's nice, but, it's still very much caught up with, you could say there's strings attached. I might give something and then I expect something in return. Or I might want them to sort of thank me. And, when you give and you're expecting thanks back, you can say, yes, you're giving, but it's still very much caught up in this subject, object, and action. Whereas when there's no attachment to any kind, without thinking, oh, I'm giving this to that lucky person that's receiving it. When there's not that, there's an organic need for something and we just give it. Well, that's exactly what we mean with the absence of subject, object, and action. And that's where practicing generosity in the context of the paramitas is actually intending, we're there, we could say we have the generosity that is tainted. Sakche ki gyewa in Tibetan means virtuous action that's tainted with this, I am doing this for so-and-so, you know? When there's actually that freedom from that sort of like narrowness, then this is then where it becomes paramitas. And that's where all the paramitas, they actually implicitly bring us into the condition of non-duality. Generosity, even if it is initially we do give, right? We still think, oh, I'd like to get some thanks, right? So that's where we begin with generosity that is tainted, or that is comes with this duality. But generosity itself comes with gradually a habituation and a greater freedom that leans towards this non-duality. So that's where they are associated with the wisdom that transcends these three spheres. And then three, they fulfill the wishes of others. And that's also, you would say, the paramitas, they're always going to be of use to others. Generosity is going to benefit others. Discipline, in the sense that we're not stuck on our own, you would say, patterns of whatever it could be, sloppiness, or just simply indulging our own impulses, patience, not giving into anger, and so forth. All of these naturally make us less of a nuisance. We are less of a nuisance to ourselves, and less of a nuisance to the world. And actually, we're not only that, but we're actually being of use and help to others. And then finally, these 6 paramitas, they lead beings. They lead beings subject to their karmic lot to maturation in any of the 3 types of enlightenment. So that's where, on the basis of the practice of the paramitas, we're benefiting others. And we are not only, you could say, giving them some temporary benefit, but we're leading them also to the 3 types of enlightenment. I think here we're referring to 3 types of enlightenment. It's the enlightenment of the Shravaka, the Pratyeka Buddha, and then perfect enlightenment as per the Mahayana path. So these are called paramita, literally param, other shore, and ita, gone, because they transcend the corresponding worldly virtues and those of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas and reach beyond samsara. So again, these take us to the other shore because, for example, in the case of generosity, yes, it's generosity, we can practice generosity, but, very often generosity comes with some expectations. And here, in the context of the practice, and also with of course, on the basis of the instruction and guidance and examples of teachers, then we have some idea what that really involves. And that's where it's something that takes us beyond just the ordinary limited understanding of generosity. It takes us beyond samsara. So Kangyur Rinpoche writes, the first 5, generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and concentration, are related to the sublime accumulation of merit, while the 6th paramita corresponds to the great accumulation of wisdom. Yeah, let's see what they say about that. So it says here, this distinction is made according to whether the practice is undertaken in relation to conceptual reference. While the accumulation of merit implies the presence of dualistic concepts of subject and object, the accumulation of wisdom implies their absence. So that's a little bit like I was just mentioning before. And that's where the skillful means of the first 5, generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, and concentration. The skillful means of these are that they take into account our dualistic experience. Now, what this does, however, is in that they are dedicated to something greater. And if this is joined with the bodhicitta of aspiration, then they constitute accumulation of merit. And let's be clear on what we mean with merit. Merit is not just good karma. It's good karma could lead that we have everything we want. And getting everything we want, we might actually be seriously spoiled and not necessarily particularly happy. It's really just, you could say it's a question of what is good karma, but karma is basically the result of some actions. And so some actions might lead us to be comfortable in some way. We could then call that good karma if we want. But merit is quite specific. That's the kind of action that brings us to the path of liberation, punya. And that's where accumulating merit means that we provide the conditions, you could say karmic conditions, the conditions within our, you could say on the realm of our actions and so on, that create particular habits and imprints that fructify in the future. But these are actions that then connect us with the path of enlightenment. So that's where we then talk about merit. So that's where the first five, they can do that. The sixth one goes beyond the conditions of any kind of reference point. They are about the sixth one is about the unconditional. And that's what we refer to as the accumulation of wisdom. So that's where you could say, we say in the Mahayana that the ground is the insight into reality, and yet also understanding our present reality, what we call the two truths. That's the view. The path are these accumulations of merit and wisdom that then lead to what we call the two bodies, the body of wisdom, knowing the reality as it is, and also the body of compassion manifesting for others, the Dharmakaya and the Rupakaya. It says, aside from these two accumulations of wisdom and method united, there is no other means of attaining Buddhahood. Now, this is not just sort of Buddhist fundamentalism saying that there is only one way here. It's really just being very practical, because Buddhahood is seeing through confusion, and that's wisdom. That's what sets us free. And we need to, while we're not free, we need to take into consideration our present reality and making that the path. And that's then the accumulation of method. So that's where you could say the accumulation of wisdom has to do with enlightenment itself, gradually integrating enlightenment within our being. And the accumulation of method or merit, that is actually taking into account where we are right now. So one has to do where you could say the potential, but the other is also operating with the reality of what is. We have that notion of, what is it, Pema Chodron, who has a book, I think it's called Start Where You Are, something like that. And that's the method. So this, you could say there's, that's you could say a profound aspect really, or that's a profound perspective on what we're doing on the Buddhist path. In addition to the usual 6 paramitas, a further 4 may be added. So these are, and I think it says here, the paramitas 7 to 10 are not so much separate perfections as qualities accompanying the previous 6 paramitas. Okay. So these are 7 skillful means, which is the dedication of generosity and so on, to the great enlightenment of all beings, on account of which the merit generates becomes inexhaustible. And that is something that everyone that comes across the practice of the Mahayana and probably is familiar with, where whenever we practice something, we always dedicate. We don't hold on to it, we give it away. And that's where we would say virtuous actions that we might do, such as generosity. That's wonderful, that has great value. But unless it's dedicated, the value of it doesn't last very long. That's why we say we have a drop of water on our finger. It's not going to stay there very long. But if we put this water in the ocean, then it never exhausts, so to speak. So that's where dedication is, again, essential, that's the skillful means. 8, strength, by which overcoming all adverse conditions transforms merit into enlightenment. So adverse conditions, of course, constitute the phenomena of our karma. We might have all sorts of karma, but that's where we then have on the path, you could say what we call the armor of strength, that with which we never see anything as being something that can't be integrated on the path. This we also see in the Lojong teaching, to transform negative conditions into the path. There should never be a time where there's something that we say, oh, I can't practice because of this or that. So that's strength. 9, aspiration, whereby the practitioner is always eager to engage in virtue on account of which the qualities of generosity and the other paramitas will always arise in subsequent lives. So that's where aspiration really is setting our mind or directing our mind in a particular way. So that's where when we, for example, engage in generosity, it becomes part of us. And that's where this then is embedded in our, you could say, fundamental disposition, what we call the alaya. And this will be part of, or what drives our being in the future. So we're setting down, you could say, patterns that will manifest in the future as well. And then 10, primordial wisdom, wherewith all the paramitas are practiced, bringing others to spiritual maturity. So the primordial wisdom is then the condition essentially where we ultimately are returned to our original ground. And that comes with this, like I mentioned before, 2 bodies really. One is the awakened condition, the wisdom that is no longer, you could say, deceived, and then also the form that is the spontaneous outpouring of that wisdom is then the compassionate form that benefits others. So these, therefore, are the 10 transcendent perfection possessed by all true Buddhas. But then again, keep in mind, just for your own sort of sake in terms of practicality, the main thing is really the first 6. And the others, they're more sort of, you could say, related. But the first 6, generosity, discipline, patience, discipline, meditation, and wisdom, these are, you could say, these are huge within the Mahayana context. These are essentially what defines the way that we integrate or practice actively, integrate the bodhicitta. See, there's a question here. What the word accumulator stands for in the context of wisdom and merit? Well, you could say we naturally possess, innately we possess, you could say perfection. But relatively, right now, we have a situation of us of not being, you could say, completely at ease with our situation. This discomfort that we call samsara, that comes with a situation of a lot of confusion. And that's where we then cultivate the qualities of the path. So that's where we cultivate or accumulate, becoming a little bit wiser. Every time we sit down and meditate, we become a little bit less naive. We become a little bit less controlled by or submissive to the confusion and the impulses of our mind. Every time we sit down and meditate, we become a person that becomes a little bit less foolish, has a little bit wider, greater horizons, and that we could call the accumulation of merit. And, of wisdom. And practicing the practices such as generosity, we become habituated to just be generous, kind, or we become patient, or we become increasingly disciplined. That's the accumulation of merit. Yeah. Any more questions? Shall we do this one here? Yeah. We have a few minutes left. Okay. So here, Jigme Lingpa, in the root verses, he writes 22. The children of the conqueror, accomplishing this path, according to their strength of mind, are classified as 3. Those who wish to free themselves and then to liberate all beings have bodhicitta of great aspiration in the manner of king. Those who wish to free themselves and beings all at once have bodhicitta of most sacred wisdom in the manner of a ferryman. Those who wish peace for once beings have been saved have unexampled bodhicitta in the manner of a shepherd. Bodhisattvas who are dull in their capacity need 33 unmeasured kalpas for finding their freedom. Those of moderate capacity need 7, while those of the sharpest faculties need 3. Now, there's three kinds of bodhicitta, in the sense that there's those where we want to first get enlightened and then we can look after the others. That's the king-like. Then they say, okay, we'll all do it together. That's the ferryman. We all cross the river together. And then there's the shepherd, who actually doesn't, has out looking for the sheep or the cows, doesn't actually go home until all the cows or all the sheep have been sort of brought into the pen, the corral. So that's where there's the looking out for others first, and that seemed to be the most noble one. Now, as long as we do this, we practice this, then of course we're on the Bodhisattva path. But as long as there still is this sense of I am doing this, as long as we still have the dualistic mind, and that persists for a very long time, then we're still on the path. And that's why in the Mahayana, we say it will take, depending on what kind of aspiration, what style of Bodhisattva we are, then it will take anywhere from 33 to 3 infinite eons for us to achieve awakening. Mind you, we're on the right path. This will be a path of great happiness. It's a path that is dedicated to the cause of bliss, namely caring for others. So there's not as if it's a really slog for those 33 kalpas, or 3 kalpas. Here then it says, according to the criterion of courageous determination, there are said to be 3 kinds of practitioners on the Bodhisattva path. First, there are those of basic faculties who perfect the 2 accumulations in order to attain Buddhahood for themselves first, so they might afterwards be able to liberate others. Theirs is called bodhicitta of great aspiration in the manner of a king. It was the way in which the noble Maitreya first generated bodhicitta. Second, there is the bodhicitta generated by those of medium faculties who wish to free themselves and all beings together simultaneously. This is known as the bodhicitta of sacred wisdom in the manner of a ferryman. Finally, there is the bodhicitta generated by those with superior faculties who wish to establish others in Buddhahood before themselves, while they remain on the 10th ground. So that's the most noble kind of bodhisattva, because they're capable of benefiting others. They remain on the 10th ground, but nevertheless, they're not entering into perfect awakening until all beings have been freed. So that's where we have these different degrees of, you could say, courage. It is only, in regards to the last kind, it's only after all others saved that they wish to enter the peace of nirvana. This is the unsurpassable way of generating bodhicitta in the manner of a shepherd. This is the bodhicitta of the bodhisattvas, Manjushri and Avalokiteshvara. The Ratnakuta says that bodhisattvas of basic faculties will reach the goal of the path and attain enlightenment after 33 measureless kalpas. They require 3 measureless kalpas for the paths of accumulation and joining, and 3 for each of the 10 grounds. Bodhisattvas of medium capacity need 4 measureless kalpas. 4 measureless kalpas for the paths of accumulation and joining, 1 kalpa for the path of seeing, 1 for the 7 impure grounds, and 1 for the 3 pure grounds. Now, what we mean of grounds here, in Sanskrit, it's bhumi. It really means levels of, you could say, spiritual or of enlightenment. It's where the bodhisattvas, when they first attain insight into the absence of solid reality, the absence of self, and realize selflessness. This is what we call the first bhumi. And when we talk about the 5 paths, we talk about this as the path of seeing. So that's where, when the bodhisattva is on the first bhumi, then we would say they have very little confusion. They already have seen, you could say, the nature of reality. And then as they progress and have less and less confusion, we talk about then these increasing grounds. These sort of, when we talk about 10 grounds or 10 bhumis. When we reach what's called the 3 pure grounds, these are grounds in which they don't fall back again. They're not perfectly enlightened, but they don't fall back. And this is also the grounds in which there's a complete seeing of the pure nature of themselves and of all beings. And that's where then, at that point, they have what we would call pure perception, unobscured perception that sees the purity of all phenomena. And this is quite relevant then when we come to the Vajrayana, where we actually practice visualizing the experience of the bodhisattvas on the 3 pure grounds. So then there's bodhisattvas of supreme faculties need 1 kalpa for the path of accumulation and joining, 1 for the 7 impure grounds, and 1 for the 3 pure grounds. So that's where the bodhisattvas, and the greatest kind of bodhisattvas, they have 1 kalpa for the, you could say, the first 2 paths, and then on the path of seeing, they then remain there for along the 7 impure grounds, and then for the path of meditation and the path of no more learning or path of meditation, then they're there for 1 kalpa for the 3 pure grounds. So consequently, they attain nirvana after 3 measureless kalpas. So that's the, you could say, the nature then of the Mahayana path. Of course, it's a little bit different when we come to the Vajrayana, because in the Vajrayana, we're actually taking what we would call the non-conceptual or non-dual wisdom as the ground of the path. And that's where we don't necessarily talk about 3 measureless kalpas. But at the same time, also, if we understand what the Mahayana path is about, then it just seems like, it still seems like a wonderful thing to be doing, even though there might be what we presently think of in terms of a long duration of time. But again, time is so relative. So that's also where, when we think of this, you might think of it in terms of being a very long time. But for the bodhisattvas, again, time is very relative and not necessarily that, I would say, that much of a problem. Okay. So someone asks, is there such bodhisattvas now here on earth walking? Yes, we would actually see our teachers as such. So when we have great masters like the Dalai Lama, Sona Sakatrinsen, the Kangyur Rinpoches, and so on, we actually consider that these are such bodhisattvas. And we might even see them as we were encouraged here, as Buddhas. We might say, well, these might appear in the form of bodhisattvas, but their actually true nature is the Buddha. Dear Jakob, last week you mentioned some Ajamika teaching for which you would provide a link. I wonder if you can remember. Yes, you know what? I'm going to do it right now here in the chat. And I'm actually guilty because it's actually already begun. But if you register for this teaching, then you will have access to the recordings. But I would like to say, I warmly recommend this. Let me just actually, first of all, hey, by the way, I'm doing a retreat down in Italy, just outside Milano, down in a place called Seme, just in case anybody is in Italy. Anyway, let's just see here. Let me just find this. So I'm going to give you the link, and I'm going to then copy link this. Yeah. So let me just tell you what this is. This is very much relevant to what we're doing right now. It's Wilson Fletcher, who is going through Jigme Lingpa Rinpoche's introduction to a very important Madhyamika text called the Madhyamika Alamkara, which is a text that actually I mentioned, or Kangyur Rinpoche mentioned the two aspects of the Mahayana path being the profound and the vast. And the profound meaning the teachings on Madhyamika, teachings on the insight into the nature of shunyata. And it's associated with the second turning of the wheel. And then there's the third turning of the wheel, which is on the qualities of awakening and Buddha nature. And that's associated with the Yogacharya tradition. And sometimes these are seen as two different paths, or that have different approaches. But the great master Shantarakshita, he brought these together, and also brought this together with what we call the tradition of pramana, epistemology. But this teaching on that really you could say is often referred to as the last greatest development of the Mahayana in India. The Madhyamika Alamkara is really a text that brings together all the aspects that are essential for our journey, because it's the understanding of the empty nature of phenomena, and at the same time also understanding the qualities of awakening, and very much taking into consideration the way in which we engage with an understanding of emptiness. Because sometimes when we come across Madhyamika teachings, it's sort of, especially what we call the Prasangika Madhyamika, it's kind of tough to get to that. It's sort of essentially saying, well, any conceptual reference point is necessarily obscuring us, and it defeats any logic, or it defeats any logic that holds on to some philosophy or some conceptual understanding of the absolute. But it doesn't actually put up something instead. And that's where Prasangika Madhyamika, and some of you have studied that with Tsongtsen Rinpoche, is very difficult. It's essential for the path, but it's also a path that really requires a lot of wisdom. And that's where the more gradual approach that we have in the Madhyamika Alamkara is extremely valuable. Anyway, that's about the text. And I would also like to say the man who's presenting this, Wilson Fletcher, is somebody who is exceptionally good at presenting, you could say, these ideas. He's a translator of the text together with his partner, Helena. But he's just somebody who very patiently teaches in a very clear way. So I can't warmly enough recommend attending to this teaching if you can. So it started on Thursday night. It will be running. It ran yesterday. It'll be running tonight and also on tomorrow. So that's where you can access. If you register, you will have access to the recordings for the previous sessions. But I apologize for not having provided the link earlier. But anyway, I hope you all have it now. Have you all seen it? It's in the chat. Yeah, okay, that's good. All right, that's it for this week. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. I'll just dedicate. Let's just see. Okay. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night, realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning. May we cross the ocean of existence in that life, thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world. May we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Okay. Thank you. Take care.